They might go more like this. Your environment goes to hell in a handbasket. There is dramatic inequality. Inequality has become dramatically greater during the period since 1950 than had ever been seen before. On the other hand, connectivity is greater. People see on television what they don't have. If you're living on $2 or $3 a day, it makes a great deal of difference if you can see what the people who don't live on $2 or $3 a day are up to. That might lead to disagreements. That might lead to discomfort with a global world. That might lead to the fortress. So the scenarios can be used in exactly this way, to think about what's involved in a worldview, and then how, if you broaden out the possibilities, you might get a very different outcome. Now, this seems fairly trivial. Let me point out to you that there are lots and lots of very large-scale models where what I just showed you would be literally impossible to discuss, because the models take as an axiom that the market is the only way the world could be. And so these non-market developments can't occur. They don't exist in that world. Let me talk about a different kind of analysis, somewhat more subtle. These red lines represent various developments that would occur in a market forces world, all of which you might have some degree of discomfort with. So let's pick hunger, for example. The number of hungry people stays about the same. The proportion of hungry people falls, of course, because global population is rising. So the upper right-hand corner is what the World Bank thinks of when they talk about success in combating poverty. The fraction of people who are hungry goes down. The fraction of people living on $1 or $2 a day goes down. Fraction living on $3 a day might stay about the same, but that's not discussed that much. So you have a flat line here. Now, how can you change that? Say you're a policymaker. Just imagine the UN had some real power, and you wanted to think about a world where that wasn't the way things worked. You preferred a different world. Well, you're the policymaker. If the UN's a little abstract, imagine you're the king. Okay, so you call in whoever it is that reports to you, and you want to change policy. We call this bending the curve because each of these curves is literally bent in the direction you might want it to go. Is this technically possible? Can you do it? If you had complete policy control, could you rig things? So, for example, water stress went down dramatically. Climate stabilized. The number of people who are hungry declined in absolute numbers. Well, the answer is sort of interesting. The answer is yes, but. So the yes part is that you can design policies which make all of these things happen. Those of you who are familiar with Amory Lovin's work, Amory's right. You can technically do these things. But how well is it going to really work? Is the policy going to produce the results you want? Will the capital flows be in the direction you expected? And will the 8 zillion other things that need to work out exactly right for this to come together, will they all work? So in a world where everything works exactly right, yes, you can make it. How likely is it that everything will work exactly right? How well did securitized mortgages work? Then there's the question of who will vote for it. This is sort of where the rubber meets the road. Because when you think about policy change, you take the government and you abstract it from the people who are governed. But they have to vote for that government. And so technical change, top-down change may not be enough. So what would be enough? Well, how about changing our values? How about some change from the bottom up? How about looking at quality of life rather than quantity of stuff? How about looking at whether we're all in it together rather than how far we are ahead of the next person and whether they're gaining on us? How about ecological sensibility, which goes beyond public policy and translates into personal lifestyles? And how about doing this in a pluralistic fashion? Because we aren't going to agree. There's simply not going to be a consensus on how all of these things will work out. So how about this kind of a world? If one had this kind of a world, and at this point I just ask you to perform what the physics students will recognize as a thought experiment. I'm not saying to do it, to commit to it, but just think about how it would be if things were this way. Be a very different place. One thing that would be different is that we would focus on different things when we think about how the world changes. We wouldn't focus on the top line. We wouldn't focus directly on all of the things that we usually count. We would focus a little deeper. The reason we would do that is if you get a little deeper, you can get under the things that you usually count. So rather than having governance change, you might try to change the power structure. Rather than having the economy change, you might try to change your values and needs. Let me talk a little more concretely about how this might work. So here's an example that shows how you might change the physical demands that our economy makes on the world. We think of our well-being as related to our consumption. We think of our consumption as related to material throughput. That is, how much stuff gets used up, manufactured, and consumed, preferably by us. We can step down to the policy level. We can say, let's be more efficient. This is, you might say, Amory's wedge. Okay? So we can basically do everything more efficiently. This is what most people prefer to talk about. This is certainly what most government policymakers talk about.